Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Noyes, my understanding, I'm sorry you're on the hot seat here, but you got a lot of topics apparently people are interested in. So my understanding that PRM is providing funding for transportation, shelter, cash, and debit cards, and legal counseling in Mexico, aiding the flow of migrants to the U.S. border. And maybe you wouldn't characterize it as aiding, but I think it providing those things does aid. They're coming to America through Mexico. PRM defined a dollar amount ranging from $212 to $486 in the form of cash and voucher assistance to migrants. Now, when testifying for the Foreign Affairs transcribed interview at the time, I don't think you knew the number of migrants receiving funds in Mexico or how frequently migrants apply for CVA. And I'm not sure you knew the categories or types of what spending would be prohibited. Do you know those figures now? Do you have that?
Congressman, I can tell you that the funding that PRM provides for non-governmental organizations and for cash and voucher assistance in Mexico is less than 10% of the total assistance that PRM provides in Mexico. That funding is directed to about 10% of the people who are seeking asylum in Mexico. We give them very limited amounts of funding so that they can remain safely in Mexico while awaiting adjudication of their asylum claims in Mexico. And I do have a specific figure that I can give you. We have one NGO partner that provides cash and voucher assistance in Mexico. It serves 1,845 people and provided $175,000, which comes to less than $100 per person for the year in Mexico.
Okay. I didn't ask for the percentage, but that's fine. I guess I'm supposed to feel good about that. So are you saying that PRM only provides funding through the NGO or at the 10% level or what have you, only to migrants transiting through Mexico if they are remaining in Mexico? You don't provide any of that funding if they're going to continue to transit Mexico to the United States?
That is my understanding.
That's your understanding. And can we have that, can this committee request that documentation regarding that understanding that you have be provided to us?
We will be happy to follow up.
Okay. The UNHCR received more funding than any other organization, PRM, with funding levels at $46 million. Then the UNHCR takes that money and maybe it's a derogatory term to say funnels, but it distributes those millions of dollars to other organizations to carry out such services as legal counseling to asylum seekers and migrants. PRM, in 2022, PRM also funded the UN International Organization for Migration, or IOM, with $30.5 million for activities in Mexico, which is an increase in $5 million from 2021. Do you think, I mean, look, you're dealing with all these folks and these agencies, do these millions of dollars provided by the taxpayers of the United States, do you think they're an incentive to migrants who, let me ask it, maybe a better way to ask it this way. That money that is spent through the UNHCR or IOM, does it require that migrants be vetted first before that money is spent on them for legal services or what have you? Vetting.
Our partners, and this is part of our agreements with them and the oversight that we conduct with them, absolutely check on the beneficiaries, figure out who really needs the assistance, and provide assistance only to those who really are the most vulnerable. And in Mexico...
I'm sorry, I'm running out of time here. Everybody's vulnerable when you leave your country and you're transiting. I think everybody'd be vulnerable in Mexico doing that journey. But I'm talking about vetting to come to the United States of America. Are they vetted prior to this? There's a lot of money. That's $30.5 million and $46 million. So, you know, $86.5 million is spent on legal services, et cetera, for these people transiting Mexico to come to the United States. do we require them to be vetted before they get access to that money in the form of legal services and other services that they would receive as a result of that money?
We do not provide that funding in order to help people go to the United States. On the contrary, that funding is provided in order to provide assistance to people where they are. And as I had indicated earlier, it's to build up the Mexico Asylum Agency to provide support for people to remain in Mexico and seek asylum there. We also provide funding for assisted voluntary returns for people to return to their country of origin, to cease from those trips.
Do you have figures? Look, I appreciate that narrative. I, for one, don't believe any of it. I think it is designed to assist and aid people to come to the United States illegally. That's what it's used for. And I think there's probably a small percentage that return back to their country. I also don't believe that anybody's required to be vetted before receiving the assistance that comes through those programs. Can you provide any metrics to prove what you just said?
Certainly, we would be happy to provide information about the assistance that we have provided to Mexico's asylum agency, which has grown by 500% and has over 140,000 asylum claims in Mexico for people to remain in Mexico. We'd be very happy to provide further information.
So what I'm looking for, just so that you don't go back to work and kind of chase your tail.
Your time has expired, but you are up for another round in just a moment if you like.
Okay, I yield. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Noyes, I think from my standpoint for this committee, I misspoke. It was 76.5 million. You should never do math in public, but that I counted up there. But you said 10% essentially. But whether it's 10% or whatever of the 76.5 million, I would like to know if you can provide for us how many of those recipients were actually returned to their country, how many of the recipients were vetted, how many were not vetted prior to receiving the funding, and how many of these recipients remained in Mexico while they sought their asylum claim. I think that would at least help illuminate. Look, I don't want to be unduly critical. I represent, like everybody else here, 760,000 people. They get up early in the morning, they go to work, they're paying their taxes. We're borrowing money every single time we vote here to pay for all this stuff. We're borrowing. This is all borrowed money. And, you know, I can't speak for anybody else's district, but the district I represent, people can't afford their groceries, their gasoline, their electricity bills, their daycare bills, their normal daily needs. And when we're spending that kind of money, that amount of money, I would say it encourages people to come to the United States, but maybe you're right, and maybe I'm wrong. But I should be able to tell my bosses, this is where your tax money's being spent, this is how it's being used, and right now I can't do that. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Perry, can I borrow a moment from you?
Absolutely, yield to the chair.
I was frustrated in your last dialogue because she had Miss Val's Noyes, I didn't mean to say that incorrectly, had a dialogue with Representative Issa in which the specifics of the dialogue, please correct me if I'm wrong, were they were funding a group. That same group was providing literal materials on how to circumvent U.S. immigration law, but they were paying the same group to do other things. So it's not what we were paying them to do. They were using other monies to literally give these documents on how to circumvent U.S. immigration law. We were paying for the other stuff. Yes, it was done at the same events. Yes, they were invited to the same audience. Maybe they were at an audience for, I don't know, receiving information on something, and they were given that information by this group, happened to be paid by the U.S., but they were also delivering this. It was frustrating to me that when you were asking your questions about whether they are doing different things, funding these groups and teaching them how to circumvent immigration law. Do I have a misunderstanding of your dialogue there? Yes, you funded this group that was directing people to circumvent immigration law. Your claim is that you were not funding them to do that. They must have got the money from somewhere else to do that. But yes, they were doing that at State Department sponsored events or where there was an audience for United States Department of State.
Congressman, although we did not fund the slides, it is absolutely true that nothing in those slides was intended to circumvent U.S. immigration law. In fact, it was to provide correct information about U.S. immigration law as opposed to the garbage that smugglers and traffickers put out. And the information in those slides is all information that is readily available on multiple U.S. government websites.
If it was such corrective information, why wouldn't you want to fund that? You were very specific that you didn't fund that.
Because we only funded that organization to provide support for asylum procedures in Mexico.
And Mr. Issa did speak again very specifically about where that group was directing people to circumvent U.S. immigration law. And yes, you happen to be funding them as well, but certainly a frustrating point, not.
But Congressman
Level.
Perry, if I could, I appreciate your question about who is receiving cash and voucher assistance in Mexico funded by our partners, UNHCR and IOM. I can tell you that other countries also contribute funding to those organizations for cash and voucher assistance. So we will need to do some analysis to figure out how much of that funding came from American taxpayers versus other taxpayers, but I'm very happy to take the question back, and I appreciate it.
I apologize for not using your full Val's noise. I apologize,
I
ma'am.
have
I
one
didn't-
more question.
Noise is fine, thanks.
Okay, but now, based on that information, and look, we get that other countries fund some of this stuff, and God bless them, that's great, but I'm a representative of the American people, so that's my interest. Is there a prohibition in the State Department for funding organizations that would, look, these people are coming across the border illegally, right? Unless they're vetted and they've waited for their asylum claim, they're coming across the border illegally. Is there anything in State Department documentation that prohibits the use of those funds to be used to inform or provide care, comfort, whatever, to people that are crossing the border illegally?
The 2024 appropriation passed by Congress made clear to us that that the United States may not provide funding to assist with provision of information about U.S. immigration proceedings or about legal representation in the United States. And I have sent letters to all of our partners explicitly pointing that out to them. So yes, as a result of the legislation
Okay.
passed by this Congress, that is the case.
All right, thank you, Ms. Val's noise.